Thanks again, everybody, for coming. We want to thank all of our sponsors, all of our presenters, of course, the staff and students of the Public Land and Resources Law Review. It is my distinct honor to introduce our lunchtime speaker, even though I recognize he is an individual who needs no introduction, particularly in these circles. Charles Wilkinson is a Moses Lasky Professor of Law and Distinguished Professor at the University of Colorado. He's written over 14 books in history, public lands, and Indian law. He has a list of accolades, accomplishments, and qualifications longer than your arm, and both arms if you're short. I encourage you to read his background and to track down any and everything he has written. It is all worthwhile. I don't think it's overstatement to say that Charles is really the reason all of us are in the room, not just those of us who have learned from him, been mentored by him, or read his work, but he has played a fundamental role in defining what we understand both as public lands law and Indian law. And I assume we're all in the room because we're interested in one of those two topics. I will only mention two important qualifications and accolades of Charles, simply to highlight, particularly relevant to his talk today. He was special counsel to the Department of the Interior in drafting the proclamation that established the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And second, he also holds the distinction of having written the first article in the first volume of the Public Lands and Resources Law Review. Charles told me that, and old habits die hard. I am no longer his research assistant, but I did indeed have to go site check that. It is true. One Public Land and Resources Law Review 1 is authored by Charles Wilkinson. I encourage you to review it. The Field of Public Land Law, Some Connecting Threads and Future Directions, only too appropriate for our conference today. Please join me in welcoming Charles Wilkinson.
Oh my God. Monty, when are you going to calm down? Thank you so much. Yes, that is my favorite citation. One Public Land Law Review 1. I've learned so much from coming up here over the years. I had one stretch when I was in Montana working on different matters and getting out of the backcountry. At the end of the year, I realized I had been up here once, at least once, every month of that year. And so I'm indebted to all of you and others because I've learned so much here. You do things right in a way that few other places do. This is my favorite town, and this is my favorite state. And I don't say that about anything else. We've all up here been thanking the students who have been working so hard on this. They have classes. They have a law review to do editing on and dealing with authors, which is never fun. Mostly isn't fun. And yet, they've also had the time to put on this terrific gathering. Emily Slike and Lillian Aldernoss have just been great for me in particular, and I thank them, and I know the rest of us feel the same with all the students. I'd like to thank also three people who aren't here, and that would be Marjorie Hunter Brown, who underway over a decade ago, and those of us who knew her, every one of us who knew her felt a great loss. Understand that that early conference was the first conference ever held on public lands, period. And it was right at the beginning of the modern time of the law of the American West. And also, the journal was the first. And I think it was the vision of lots of people here, but I think Marge was preeminent in that regard. And I know the Indian Law Clinic is named after her, and everybody who is involved with that organization, which was the first of its kind, should be proud. And I want to thank Monty also for the work that he did here. Ray Cross, who was a major Indian scholar. You can get a collection of his essays that this law review has put together, and I recommend his work to all of you who care about the West. And I'd like to add also somebody who is connected to this university through his daughter Nikki, who talked earlier, but mainly did so much for Indian people, and that's Frank Ducheneau. And Frank and Forrest Gerard came in to their positions in the Congress on staff, Frank in the House, Forrest in the Senate. First Indian people ever to have deep responsibilities on Capitol Hill. And it was right when the modern tribal movement was getting going, and the tribes were bringing bills now forward, which they'd never done before. And Frank was there. And I tell you, in Frank's case, he's a tough guy. He's a smart guy and knows a lot. And he knew that one of his main jobs was to make sure that the tribes didn't ask for things that were impossible and mean they wouldn't get anything. And I will tell you, on 3 different bills, he just said to me, you've got to make these changes. You've got to make these changes. I mean, he didn't want to make them. I didn't want to make them. But he was very wise in that. And he's a historic figure, really, for the work that he did. And Forrest, too, they worked together very, very closely. And that was quite a time. Look, I would like to spend most of my time reporting on the Bears Ears National Monument. The last panel, the whole morning was terrific, but wasn't the last panel just outstanding? And the idea of building bridges and the importance of relationships for people who work in issues involving the West generally, and Indian issues in particular, know how important it is to understand the subtleties and depth of those matters, and how you've really got to work hard on that part of it. Because if that isn't there, it's likely you're not going to have something happen that would benefit both or all sides. And so Bears Ears fits in that category, because the proclamation of Barack Obama called for collaborative management between the 5 tribes and the Interior, the Forest Service and BLM to manage and make decisions on regard to this monument together. And it's never happened before. This is the furthest of tribal involvement in federal land decision-making on the books. The Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes were very close to reaching that with regard to the Bison Range, but that was wrongfully set back. And they are now going about it a different way. But they were leaders in this, as that tribe has been in so many situations. But I'd like to talk about Bears Ears. And this is the Bears Ears National Monument. You can see the four corners down in the lower right-hand corner. It's all in southern Utah, but comes very close to the Colorado and Arizona lines. You can see in the upper right-hand corner Moab, and get a sense for its northern extent. It goes longer than 60 miles. It's more than 2.4% of the entire state of Utah. And you hear that it's been controversial, but it has been controversial in this sense that nationally it was widely accepted, overwhelmingly accepted. In Utah, the polls show about an even amount of people for it and against it. But the elected leaders, the whole delegation, the governor, the attorney general, the San Juan County Commission were rabidly against it, to the point that they were holding screaming matches in Secretary Jewell's office, having several meetings with President Obama and now with President Trump. And they talk about this as the end of a way of life. They see the land as theirs. The people of southeastern Utah, the non-Indian people, and the emotions run really deep among that group. But otherwise, it's been widely accepted. It's you'll see some terrific country and well worth becoming part of the world's best conservation system. This is a map that the coalition, and I'll come back to the coalition in a minute, the tribal coalition. And Utah, the San Juan County was holding hearings, even though it's not a federal entity, on the monument, refused to have anybody from outside of Utah testify. And so four of the tribes are outside of that part of Utah. And so, and they were being called outsiders. And whereas we know that citizens always come in from different parts of the country to comment on major public lands issues. But they said, we just don't see this in terms of state lines. We don't see it in terms of state lines. And so the coalition prepared this map to show the area without state lines. And I want to point out that these tribes, Navajo at 16 million acres, larger than 13 states, but appreciate that the other tribes are all substantial land-based tribes. Zuni at about 600,000, Hopi almost a million acres, Ute Mountain Ute about 600,000, and Uinta and Ouray about 3/4 of a million acres. They're all large reservations, and now these are the Bears Ears. They are not tall by the dimensions of western mountains. They're 10,000 feet, but they're in this particular area, which is, as many of you know, the canyon country has got a lot of different mountain ranges running through it. It happens that in this area, it is the highest point. You can see it from about 60 miles, 70 miles from the south, and you can see it from literally every direction, this formation, Bears Ears. And here that there's Navajo Mountain in the background with Bears Ears framing it. And it's the kind of great red rock country you have in the Southwest. It goes on and on. This is Monarch Village. And some of you have hiked into these backcountry villages. When I go there, I get a feeling I get nowhere. And it's a sense of spirituality, not pretending you're a Pueblo tribal member or something, but it's just a feeling. And for example, this hike in is about 3/4 of a mile. It isn't long, it isn't steep. It's in Comb Ridge, this long 80-mile feature that's one of the main features of the monument. And but I would urge any of you to try to do some day hiking, backpacking that includes some of these villages. Oh, it's well worth it. And this was a favorite destination of my boys and me, long before Bears Ears was formally proposed. And so I can tell you that the gleam in their eyes, they felt what I felt, what we all feel at this kind of just. And these formations are anywhere from 800,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 years old. And pictographs are here where you have these small handprints. And nobody's, as far as I know, anthropologists and Pueblo people are not certain whether these were smaller children who did these or maybe adults with smaller hands who did these. But these are of some commonality. And they are pictographs. And petroglyphs are created by breaking the surface. And you can see here that bird, that's been pecked out by the artist. And so, Native people live there since time immemorial. And dozens of tribes live there at different times or travel through. And Navajo people settled in, obviously Pueblo people settled in, Ute people settled in. And in the mid-1800s, we've already heard talk of the mid-1800s here today, people were moved from their homelands to reservations. And you've heard of the Navajo Long March. And one major thrust of it took place in what is now Bears Ears. And understand that today, all of Bears Ears is federal land. There are state inholdings, but when things calm down, we'll get to that later, there's going to be a land exchange between the state and federal government so that this is a contiguous all acres. Right now, I didn't say 1.35 million acres is the size of Bears Ears now. And when that land exchange is made, which I seem to be overwhelmingly probable, it'll be 1.5 million. But they marched them off. And it was a forced march in the extreme, in that they just didn't point rifles at people and order them to go, and they left. If somebody paused, they got shot. And there were rapes, as there were in so many of these forced removals. And they were marched to the reservations, and few people hung on, but even though this is rough country and hard to find people in, the soldiers kept at it and gradually kept moving people out. And then when the Mormons who settled this country came in, they pushed people out also. And also made it clear that any of the people weren't welcome in town, and that this is Utah country. One of the many ways during the Bears Ears proposal process that you had these unfortunate statements is the Utah delegation leaders just repeatedly said, the people of San Juan County, the people of San Juan County don't want this monument. They don't want it. San Juan County is almost 60% Native American. But they aren't people. Robert Kennedy ran for president in 1968 and came to Bluff, and the Navajo people told him about it, showed him some of the horrible looting that had started in the 1890s, where people came in and took out uncountable amount of baskets, beadwork, cooking tools, and pots, and footwear, some clothing, because this country's so dry that you can still find stuff of 1,000, 2,000 years ago. And they took it out and made a whole hell of a lot of money. And they took out human remains also. Human remains. Just took it out. Sold them or took them to museums. And so they told Robert Kennedy about this. And he said, in '68, I will do something about this, and we lost him just a few weeks later. But they were beginning to bring their story forward. The way that tribes have done over this period of time, this last 2 generations, when finally they found their bearing in terms of the dealings with this foreign government, then Utah Dene Bakea, in about 2010, got started to develop data and to make a change. Bijan Meza is here from UDB. And they did a prodigious amount of research. And it was cultural mapping, it was interviewing of elders, interviewing of young people, going out on the land, doing book research. And they came up with boundaries for a cultural landscape that should be set aside as a national monument. National monument, by the way, is roughly the same as a national park. You can make differences, but the point is, it's BLM land or Forest Service land, sometimes Park Service land, that you get a monument overlay on it, which calls for greater protection. And become part of the best idea we ever had. The Antiquities Act of 1906 was passed during Teddy Roosevelt's administration. And I want to tell you, when you divide presidents into categories for conservation purposes, there are only 2 categories: Teddy Roosevelt and everybody else. And so, the Antiquities Act states that it has to be the smallest area practicable. The original bill called for 640 acres. And the bill was passed to protect these villages. And the idea was, 640 acres would be enough. But people in Congress rightly saw that's too rigid. It's got to be a little more flexible than that, just a little bit more. And so, what happened when Teddy Roosevelt went to the edge of the Grand Canyon? I hereby declare 800,000 acres. Teddy Roosevelt, to move away from the subject, but not really, also personally set aside 6% of the United States, 150 million acres, over 3/4 of the entire national forest system, and did it just, they didn't have green markers out there, but they just laid the maps out and said, let's do this one, let's do this one. And he did that. But he had authority from Congress. He didn't have authority to establish National Wildlife Refuge. And so he decided he was going to do it, and the Attorney General learned about it and sent over a young Attorney General who drew himself up to his full height and said to the President, Mr. President, we can find nothing in law that allows you to create a National Wildlife Refuge. And President Roosevelt said, very well. Did you find anything that prohibits me from doing it? 65 wildlife refuges under the Roosevelt pen. And so Obama had a pen too. And look at what he did. And does this speak to his values and way of doing things? He learned about national monuments and liked it because there were about 5 or 6 areas where the president had very broad authority. And the Antiquities Act, the courts have said it's basically limitless, the presidential authority. The Antiquities Act said the president, in his discretion, may create national monuments, with language after that, including the smallest area practicable. But it's very broad discretion. And he was, of course, having trouble getting anything through Congress. And so the second term, he says, here's another place, this Antiquities Act. So he wanted to do national monuments, and he did some. And then he decided that he wanted his last national monuments to honor dispossessed peoples. And so he set aside Cesar Chavez home, set aside founding documents for LGBT, for feminism, a couple of monuments for Hispanics, and others. And he just thought that was the right way to do it. And of course he wanted to do it for tribes. And the only proposal that was coming forward was Bears Ears. And so UDB had developed this great monument size. It was 1.9 million acres, and what you saw earlier is again 1.35. At the end, the Obama administration took some out, hoping that maybe the Utah delegation wouldn't scream as loudly, but they kind of knew that really Utah would scream as loudly, and they did, and continue to. But with the original proposal, the cultural landscape proposal, which is, again, basically what the current monument is. The conservation groups liked it, and they were ready to bring it forward. On July 16th, 2015, the tribes came together. What are we going to do about Bears Ears? There were several different alternatives. The best alternative, I think everybody realized, was a national monument. And so the tribes knew also, and UDB knew also, that federal Indian policy is done between the tribes and the United States, tribal sovereignty. And everybody realized, and as I say, I give so much credit to UDB for itself acknowledging this, that this had to come forward with the tribes. And so the Hopi, Zuni, Navajo, Ute Mountain Ute, and Northern Ute on July 16th formed a Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition to put this through. And at the same day, they were interested in co-management, it was being called at the time, but wanted to have that in it. And I want to come back to that in just a second. And they set October 15th as a date to produce a comprehensive proposal. To produce, they hoped, they dreamed, would be the best proposal ever put forth for a national monument. And people say that probably it is. And so they set aside a full Saturday to talk about co-management and how it's quite a general term, but that it can be, at one end of the spectrum, can be weak collaborative co-management. They decided to call it collaborative. And one reason this proposal went through is that the tribes' yearnings were so pure. And so they liked collaborative better than co-management because they really wanted to work with the federal agencies. And so then there's hard co-management, which would mean that both sides would have a veto. And they knew, we knew at the time, that was not politically possible, but we put it in front of them. put that idea in front of them and spent a full day, 8:30 to 5:30, with no break for lunch, and everybody stayed. About 75 people, Indian people, talking it through all day long. And finally decided they wanted strong collaborative management. And so then there was the question of meeting this deadline. Proposal is about 40 pages. You can look it up on the web easily. You can go to Bears Ears Coalition or any number of sites, and you can get the proposal to the president dated October 15th, 2016. And they spent an additional 4 days working on drafts. And the drafts were worked on in the sense that page 1 would go up, the title page would go up, and to see if changes were made there, and page 1 would go up on the screen with the tribal people. And the moderator, who is a Navajo, would say, can't go to page 2 until we get some changes on page 1. Everybody's got to get involved. This has to become ours. This has to become ours. And so they went through that with 4 different drafts. The last draft meeting was short because or shorter, half a day, because almost everything had been resolved. I can't describe I don't want to say lobbying, but the work with the administration to come up with a final proclamation, a final result. Larry Roberts, who was here, was acting assistant secretary. He was really helpful. A whole lot of people were really helpful. Secretary Jewell, I felt, really stood out. I think that the first 2 years in office, I don't think she quite got her sea legs, but the second 2, boy, she did. And on this, she was asking all kinds of tough questions, really good tough. And Justin Pideaux, who was in the next group, was in the solicitor's office. And everybody knows what the solicitor's office is. It's the place where good ideas go to die. And Justin, I mean, to say it's a breath of fresh air is not even close. I mean, Justin asked all the tough questions, but knew it was the right thing to do, and others did too. And I of course, don't know all the meetings that went on internally on their side, but you know, people wanted to do it, just wanted to be sure it was okay. The collaborative management proposal, we came back with a new one. There were things about it people wanted changed. We were happy to do it and came back with a revised collaborative management proposal that the federal side liked immediately. There wasn't long study. It was just, yeah, this is what we like. And the proclamation was drafted up by a committee. And and this whole, I don't want to say process, in this whole scene of trying to get, and you lawyers are really going to appreciate it, and maybe everybody will, but there are no rules for how a monument gets proposed. If you were going to write regulations for national monuments to approve the current system, it would have 2 sections. 1, buy ink. 2nd, fill presidential pen and affix signature. And so, and with no process. Now, that, one of level seems great, but that means that there weren't any deadlines on them other than January 20th. And Obama did want to finish it, and that was before anybody heard of Donald Trump, whoever he was. And so, we had a whole lot of meetings, but there weren't anything like conferences with the judge or hearings. NEPA doesn't apply. So you're just floating out there. Well, one time I was talking with a guy, a really, really good guy, who was strongly behind us. And he said to me, this might be okay, but I don't think it meets with our procedures. And I said to him, I've been looking for your procedures. Would you send me a copy? And there was a long pause, and he said, I think I'm getting your drift. Nothing. So this drafting group, which, thank God, Justin was on, disappeared and came up with and by the way, I want to say in all seriousness, there were 1,000 issues to deal with. It was really, by the way, I was special advisor to the coalition on a pro bono basis. So that was my role, I should have said. So they come up with a proclamation that I think is the best proclamation ever written. The real purpose of the proclamation, it isn't said in the proclamation, but it's to honor the land, the tribes, 5 tribes, past, present, and future, and the tribe's relationship to the land. And so the idea of traditional knowledge, we want our traditional knowledge to be reflected in the management of this monument. The first, I think it's, I haven't counted remotely, but it's almost a quarter of the proclamation rising, and it's nicely written too, by the way. Rising from the center southeastern are twin buttes so distinctive that each tribe has a name for it. First time, I think, I may be wrong about this, I know something about monuments, but maybe I'm wrong about this, but this is the first time native languages had been used in the monument. And what you get in this opening passage, which sets the context for the proclamation, is facts and language that are not paternalistic, they're not romantic, they're historically accurate. And they're written to honor the tribes. Some of the densest and most significant cultural landscapes in the United States, abundant rock art, ceremonial sites, and countless other artifacts provide an extraordinary archaeological record that is important to all of us. The area's human history is as vibrant, as diverse as the ruggedly beautiful landscape. Moki steps illustrate the early people's ingenuity and perseverance. Of course, in landscapes like this, making a go of it. Farming. You can't farm out there. End of discussion. It's just rock. Allow visitors to marvel at artistry and architecture that have withstood thousands of seasons in this harsh climate. There are native stories of creation, danger, protection, and healing. That's part of traditional knowledge, those stories. And this is profound, and for those of you who love Aldo Leopold or other great philosophers about the natural world, how about this? The traditional ecological knowledge amassed by the Native Americans whose ancestors inhabited this region, passed down from generation to generation, offers critical insight into the historic and scientific significance of the area, the traditional knowledge. Such knowledge is itself a resource to be protected and used in understanding and managing this landscape's sustainability for generations to come. And, you know, I wish we were quicker to make it clear. Well, I think maybe all of us can understand that Native Americans have a special connection with the land. And I hope we're getting to the point where we really acknowledge it. And here are words that help. Secretary shall establish an advisory committee. Now, this committee is under the FACA, Federal Advisory Committee. This is low-level consultation. This is for Bears Ears in the proclamation to provide information and advice. There's almost nothing beyond that. That's what the FACA committee gets. Then, they set up a 5-member coalition, one from each tribe, to collaboratively manage with the federal agencies. In recognition of tribal participation to the care and management of the objects identified above, and to ensure, now this is a shall word. This is as strong as language gets in legal drafting. To ensure that management decisions affecting the monument reflect tribal expertise and traditional and historical knowledge. The commission is established to provide guidance and recommendation. The secretary shall meaningfully engage the commission. The secretary shall carefully and fully consider integrating traditional and historical knowledge and special expertise of the commission in land management. And this says that if the secretaries don't accept a recommendation from the commission, they will provide a written explanation of it. And that triggers an appeal within Interior to go to the secretary and the Forest Service. And there are just so many wonderful slides about Indian people. This is a Zuni family. Well, this is a law school and this is a law conference. You got to do it right. People are part of making law. And of course I am. President Obama issued an executive order that on its face didn't accomplish anything like a lot of his executive orders, but it called for a study by Secretary Zinke of all national monuments since 1996, with particular attention to Bears Ears. And the secretary ran a departmental poll, mail-in poll. 92% in favor of keeping all the monuments, including Bears Ears. As far as Bears Ears was concerned, of all the votes that came in from Utah, 80% supported. You don't get numbers like that. And so they just sort of said, well, that's just some poll. That's just fake news. But, Mr. Secretary, it's yours. I am going to finish at the full amount that Monty was so nice to give me. I want to, and let me say this. For years, George Coggins and I have a public lands casebook. For years, we've talked about national monuments, and we just say, there's an Attorney General's opinion saying that later presidents cannot distinguish monuments. And so that's, I mean, and that was done not politically or anything else, but just reporting on what the law is. Law school casebooks report on the law and do very much else. I say it as one who's authored. But we did just clinically mentioned it. And the law is on our side. But it's never gone to the Supreme Court, and significant part because future presidents haven't done this. A key thing, you all will appreciate this, is that the Antiquities Act, which is very brief, this part of the act is only 2 sentences long. It says that the president, in his discretion, may create monuments. No mention of extinguishing monuments or reducing their size. So Congress has authority over the public lands. It delegated authority to the president to create monuments, but not to extinguish them or reduce them. And by the way, we can stiffen that argument, and the other side can argue against it. Understand that? I'm just saying that that's kind of the starting point, actually. Certainly raising very directly the question of where's President Trump's power to act here? And a lot of his aides have urged him to just refer this to Congress, which plainly has the power to do whatever it wants with Bears Ears or any other national monument, park, or service area or anything. But he did that. Secretary Zinke came back with a 19-page document compared with this much of a record over on the Obama side, where all this stuff was studied to death. The letter is superficial, it's brief, it deals really with all monuments, but with Bears Ears, I think Bears Ears is half a page or 1 page, and doesn't recommend a number. Now, it's now in the White House. There's been a whole lot of work by conservation lawyers and the tribal lawyers on this. The tribal complaint against the Trump order will go in first. The others will wait a couple of days, and then they'll came in. It was in recognition. Boy, I just admire the way the conservation groups responded so much to this. And so they want the tribe's case to go ahead. You know, the monument is so much an Indian monument. Obviously, we're doing lots of other things, but again, the main point is to honor the tribes and the relationship to the land. Basically, we have our complaint drafted. The Native American Rights Fund is the umbrella attorney on this. And if the president files the executive order in the morning, we will sue in the afternoon. Maybe it'll have to go a little bit longer than that because we wouldn't know exactly what he's signing until that moment. But the point is we're ready to go right away. And I want it to happen as quickly as possible. The work of the commission is slowed down. The Secretary of Interior has violated federal law, namely the proclamation, which, as you can see, requires him and his agency to work closely with the tribes and bring in traditional knowledge. And he apparently has told field employees not to meet with the tribes, with the coalition. And so it's very frustrating. The field officials are a damn good group. And they're career professionals. And but we're kind of stymied at the moment, although the coalition is being very active. I'm not going to get into it now in a number of ways. The future of collaborative management. And again, this is very much related to consulting, but is different in that it's calling for tribal decisions right in the management and decision-making, jointly with the agency, the formal working agreement. The most expansive way this has been done by far is in the Pacific Northwest, where the tribes and the state and the United States really do have deep co-management. The tribes there have huge fishery staffs. The tribes here have terrific land management staffs, buttressed by cultural resource staffs. And so this is an area where most tribes are equipped to go in and offer up stuff that will really help federal officials. I hope that federal officials who already basically understand and do deal with tribes and get the benefits of tribal expertise and enthusiasm and quality. And so I hope that this precedent is useful to other tribes. As I mentioned, Confederated Salish and Kootenai, which wasn't allowed to, at that moment, to co-management with the bison range that's completely within the reservation. And Confederate Salish and Kootenai have a natural resources department of 600 people. And is that somebody you can collaboratively manage with? You bet, and benefit from. And it's happening in different ways. It really is, in different ways. This is a comprehensive way. This calls for monument-wide collaborative management over all decisions. And of course, we haven't reached some kind of MOA with what all those words mean. And there are going to be a lot of negotiating, a whole lot of negotiating. But let's get on with it. And I hope other tribes feel that way also. The great thing is that the tribes are never going to quit on this. They won't quit on anything. And so these tribes hate the current situation, deeply frustrated by it. But the main thing is we'll continue, and just keep doing what we can do, and we're going to have a good collaborative management regime at Bears Ears. And I hope that other tribes work in that spirit too. I hope that Bears Ears is of use in that regard. Thank you.